There's a lot of genres in movies. We have horror, sci-fi, action, comedy, drama, thrillers, westerns, documentaries. Books share some of these genres with movies, like horror, sci-fi, or thrillers, but they lack documentaries, instead just having broad, non-fiction books. Music has rock, metal, blues, punk, prog rock, funk, classical, the list just goes on and on. Painting doesn't really have genres, but it has styles. Cubism, minimalism, impressionism, surrealism, pop art. And video games, well, they have genres as well. You have RPGs, first-person shooters, roguelikes, fighting games, 2D platformers, 3D platformers, platform fighters. There's a lot of platforms in video games. But video game genres are just a bit more unique, because video games sort of have two genres, right? You can have a genre in the gaming sense, like a platformer or an FPS, but you can also have the genre in the cinematic sense, like a horror game, or a thriller game, or an action game. You would probably never hear anyone actually call a game a thriller game or a comedy game, but those types of games certainly exist. In fact, these terms we use to describe genres are much more akin to the art styles that we mentioned in painting before. It's the style of the game that the developer has created. But games already have art styles, so maybe the term, I don't know, game styles is a bit more accurate than genre. Although game styles really doesn't roll off the tongue, does it? All of this raises a very important question though. How do genres get invented? Where did these terms that we use for genres come from? And more importantly, how do we make a new genre? Well, if we look back in time at other mediums and their genres, we can actually get a fairly good hint of how new genres get made. In 1896, filmmaker Georges Méliès released his silent film, hang on, hold on, wait.
Le Manoir du Diable.
There it is. This short film was very unique back in its day. Filmmaking was very new in 1896, only dating back to about 1888, so nothing like it had ever been made. It is now considered the first horror movie ever made. Back in 1965, the Beach Boys were recording their album Pet Sounds, which was released in 1966. And in 1966, the Beatles were recording their upcoming album, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. These bands were getting a little bit bored of the pop music around at the time. Bored of playing the same 12-bar rock and roll tunes that they'd been playing for years, so they started experimenting with their music. They wrote and recorded these two iconic albums, and their experimentation led to the invention of a new genre called prog rock, which carved the path for many famous prog musicians that came after them. There were definitely albums released before this that could possibly be considered prog, but the Beatles and the Beach Boys showed commercial interest in the style and made it far more mainstream. Innovation in the art form is what creates a new genre. Creative people doing creative new things in their field is what leads to the creation of new genres. So now, we return back from our detour into other types of media, back to video games. Dota Auto Chess was a super innovative new concept for a game, and it spawned a plethora of new games that we now know as auto battlers. For the most classic example, we have Wolfenstein 3D, released in 1992. Nowadays, it's considered the grandfather of the first-person shooter, and it's considered the first ever first-person shooter. Like with prog rock, there were other examples of similar things being created before Wolfenstein was released, but those were rudimentary versions of the genre that fell a little bit flat. In 1993, just 1 year later, Doom released. Wolfenstein 3D is the grandfather of FPS games, and Doom is the father of FPS games. It was a much more refined game that was much more popular because of it. And after Doom's success, every single games company out there wanted a piece of the pie, so developers started making their very own games that were just like Doom. But back then, the term first-person shooter didn't exist. So people needed a way to describe all of these other new games that had suddenly hit the market. So they were very cynically named Doom clones. And some people still remember them by that term to this day. Fast forward a little while and bam, Valve releases Half-Life, and it's an absolute bombshell. Whereas these games were following closely to the formula that id Software had produced with Doom, Valve were adapting the formula to make something unique. Half-Life was a much more story-based game than any of the Doom clones were. Half-Life actually had 3D sprites and wasn't just 2D images rendered out in front of you all weird looking. Half-Life actually allowed you to look up and down, and have to actually aim at enemies that were vertically above or below you. In the original Doom, you could only look left and right. Vertical aiming was done automatically. Half-Life gave you full control of your character. Suddenly, this particular Doom clone didn't feel like much of a clone at all. So from here on out, people stopped really calling them Doom clones, and the name first-person shooter was adopted at some point afterwards. In the modern day, we still have this problem. The problem of genres being named after the games that invented them. Roguelikes are called roguelikes because they are like Rogue, a game where you control a little blob of text art in a world made of even more text art. Rogue was the first ever roguelike, hence the name. But modern day roguelikes are absolutely nothing like the original Rogue. The original Rogue had a lot of the landmark features of roguelikes today, such as randomly generated worlds, permadeath, emphasis on resource management with a deep and complex game to unravel and understand. But Rogue also had a lot of stuff that most roguelikes in the modern day don't have, like ASCII art, and turn-based, grid-based movement, and combat that involves killing as many monsters as possible, where there are no peaceful options available. Even the things I mentioned that are common in modern roguelikes aren't featured in every roguelike out there. Some roguelikes circumvent permadeath slightly by having permanent upgrades that you can buy, like in Dead Cells. Rogue Legacy has randomly generated worlds and permadeath, but dying doesn't end your run, but instead kills that character in particular. And you can come back to the same level again as a different character. And you can even lock the castle's room layout to stop it from randomizing again on death. Roguelikes are absolutely nothing like the original Rogue that inspired them, yet we're somehow not quite past calling them roguelikes. Maybe if we literally called them rogue clones, the name would have changed faster. Roguelikes need a new name, and I don't really have any suggestions for a good replacement. But before we as a community even tried to figure out a new name for roguelikes, another game has come along and created the exact same issue again. Dark Souls has created a whole new genre of games called Souls-likes. Lords of the Fallen, Sekiro, Nioh, Titan Souls. Steam even has a Souls-like tag as a genre, and the best game ever made in the history of mankind is considered a Souls-like. Some of these games are way more similar to Dark Souls than others, but they all get lumped under the same umbrella of Souls-like, which hinders their ability to grow into a new and unique genre. They're constantly compared back to Dark Souls. And don't even get me started on Metroidvania games. In the age of the internet, the original name sticks, especially when you have platforms like Steam that categorize all their games using these genre names. Unfortunately, all of these names seem to have stuck, and it's going to be very hard to uproot them. But maybe one day, all of these styles of game can get a new name for themselves that really does it justice. A genre name that they truly deserve. Thanks for watching.